All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar entitled Public Pension Insights 2024, Compensation and Benefit Trends. As always, my name is Hank Kim, and I'm NCPERS Executive Director. Today's program is part of our Center for Online Learning, which provides remote continuing education to public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. Today's webinar is eligible for SHRM continuing educational credits. So feel free to submit that if you are part of SHRM and need those continuing education credits. And as always, we do encourage audience participation. Please submit your questions by using the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. If you move your cursor near the bottom of your screen, a navigation bar pops up, and one of them is the Q&A function. So please submit your questions using that. Joe, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and going to the next slide. So joining me today are Nichole Hemming with the Illinois State University Retirement System, and Joe Rice, Managing Director of Compensation Consulting at CBIZ. Let me give them a quick minute to introduce themselves, and then we'll get to the presentation. Nichole, why don't you go first?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Hank already said, I'm the Chief HR Officer here at the State University's Retirement System in Illinois, and I'm excited to talk with you today about how CERS uses the information that we receive through the compensation survey, and hope to answer any questions that you may have from a perspective of a Chief HR Officer.
And Nichole, just a quick demographic on CERS, how big in terms of AUM, staff, etc.
Absolutely. So we are about $25 billion fund. We have about 250,000 members, and our FTE is right about 190.
Great. Thank you, Nichole. Joe?
Thanks, Hank. So Joe Rice with the CBIZ Compensation Consulting Team. I lead our broad-based paid practice and lead our efforts within the public pension space.
Great. So if we could go to the next slide. This is the agenda for the next hour. Roughly, we're going to provide background on the survey, talk about the methodology and the demographics of who responded, some of the key takeaways from the 2024 compensation survey, and then talk about how to best utilize the survey with conversations with Joe and Nichole. And then the last part of it is we're going to demonstrate the online dashboard, which allows NCPERS members to manipulate the data by applying filters so that as you're comparing your plan to peer plans, you can get a better apples to apples comparison. So next slide. In terms of background, just a quick introduction or information about how NCPERS got started in this survey. So back in back in 2020, as the pandemic was setting in and everybody was going to remote meetings, a number of our plan members asked NCPERS, hey, can you help facilitate and convene remote meetings for various professionals within public sector pension plans? It started with plan CIOs who, particularly mid-market plans, those plans that we said were roughly, north of 2 billion, under 40 billion, sophisticated investors, but don't have as much staff as some of the larger plans. And those CIOs were saying, listen, I've talked to our internal staff. We've had conversation with our investment consultants, but I really feel still very isolated in this lockdown. Can NCPERS provide a platform for us? So in April 2020, we started the first roundtable for CIOs. I think at that time, maybe about 20 CIOs logged on. It was supposed to last for 1 hour and ended up lasting 2 hours. And so we knew we were absolutely meeting a need. And that roundtable has been meeting since, ever since on a monthly basis. We next month expanded to plan CEOs, and that group meets every other month. And then since 2022, we've expanded this roundtable concept to include communications professionals at plans, HR professionals, as well as most recent roundtable group is the member services professionals. So having had these conversations, one of the first things that came up with the CIOs and the CEOs were the difficulty in retaining and attracting talent. And so as part of these conversations, we talked about how NCPERS could best meet this need. And we felt that one of the first things we needed to do was gather data. And so that data would be a good supplement to how our members and NCPERS even could talk to the public, policymakers, and others who have influence on public pensions and compensation, that to supplement sort of the anecdotal or qualitative stories about how plans are hurting during the pandemic. We need to buttress that with actual data. So we started talking and thinking about a compensation survey. Next slide, Joe. And part of this was we recognized that, in many respects, public sector pension plans are not your typical state or local agency. That as the fiduciary for billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, that the, the type of talent, the type of professionals that are needed to run public sector pension plans are different, and that the compensation system for public plans may not necessarily square with sort of the plan sponsor compensation rubric. And one of the things that I thought of was that, as we talk about compensation for professionals in public plans reaching mid six figures, maybe high six figures, or maybe even seven figures, that it will likely be pushback. But one analogy or analogous set of public state and local employees that really don't get a lot of pushback are the football and basketball coaches at state universities. And one of the things we would like to do is have the conversation of professionals at state and local pension plans be more likened to state university head coaches or assistant coaches, rather than your more generic or run-of-the-mill agency heads. Next slide, Joe. So we embarked on our survey in 2022. We started with 9 C-suite positions, and then last year we followed up with 13 mid to senior level positions. And next slide, Joe.
Yeah.
As we were at the end of last year, as we were preparing to do the 2024 compensation survey with a survey of frontline or junior positions, we also started the HR roundtable. In fact, it was a new partnership that we started in November. And the HR folks mentioned that, hey, CBIZ is an organization that also does compensation. CBIZ is a member of NCPERS, And from the comments we got, they thought that we each brought some strengths, and that maybe having conversations about combining our surveys added a lot of benefits, among which is a reduction of at least one compensation survey that HR professionals needed to fill in a given year. So we had great conversations with Joe and his team through the end of 2023 through early this year. And we really worked on meshing the two surveys together. The result of which is what we're going to be talking about momentarily. So it's been a pleasure working with CBIZ and Joe and his team. And I think the results that you will be sharing with you all today really underscores the benefit of this partnership. So with that, Joe, let me turn over the webinar to you.
Thanks, Hank. So I'll jump in quickly with a little bit of information about CBIZ for those of you not familiar with what we do. So we provide consulting and professional services divided between the accounting and finance space, where we have audit, tax, business valuation work, and then also on the benefits and insurance, where we have employee benefits, retirement services, property and casualty, and then talent and compensation solutions, which is where my team sits. So we do have offices across the United States, over 120 offices, approaching 7,000 team members nationally. We have long had pretty deep roots within the public pension space, especially on our retirement side, where we have pension administration solutions, where we have some self-administration or outsourcing tools that are part of that. We have actuarial and retirement services as well, and then investment advisory. And then on the talent and compensation solution side, we have our compensation consulting group, but also our executive search through EFL. So sometimes not a lot, you might not know that EFL is part of the CBIZ family, but they certainly are, and they probably do more searches for CAOs and executive directors than any other search firm. So give a little bit of background on our survey history. We originally launched our survey in 2018, which at that point included 40 participants. That again was a bottom-up thing, where when we have our consulting engagements and we're evaluating compensation practices for a pension fund, it was very common that they would want to identify a peer group for comparison. And so as a part of that compensation engagement, we would need to add that peer survey process, where we would have to add time and project fees to go out and collect and analyze that data. And so we decided in 2018, after we had a few of those custom surveys going on at basically the same time, let's just do this as an annual proactive process to get as much compensation data as we can, provide participants with free survey results, and then as a part of our consulting engagements, we'd have that data available to quickly narrow that peer group and move forward. We have been able to build that participation since 2018, and it's been a highly valuable survey, but we're really excited about the growth that we've been able to get through our partnership with NCPERS. And I'll echo too that the NCPERS team has been great to work with. I think the consolidated response definitely takes the best of both of our approaches. So originally, getting to the methodology of the current compensation study survey, we solicited data from 608 public pension funds. So as you know, you're under no obligation to participate. So we're excited that we're able to get 158 funds to provide data. So some of the information that we collected is organization demographics. You'll see some of that in a moment. But we're also looking at some of the policies, the governance and administration, who has decision rights around compensation, those type of things. We're interested in compensation planning, just to benchmark, how increases were in the prior year and the next year. We're collecting information on bonuses, benefits, and then of course, compensation data. And we've outlined 88 positions that we collected data for. So who responded? If you were to look at the prior participation in our CBIZ survey, the current respondents represent growth across all different asset categories. So most of the participants fall in that, 1 to 15 billion. That's a pretty big window, but you can see that we have good participation in funds above 60 billion. And we also have a healthy group with that below 1 billion as well. So I think whether you're a small fund or a large fund, there's going to be good representative data. And then of course, everything in between. Overall, the data represents about 19,000 employee matched responses. It's a really big number from a underlying data standpoint. And one of the numbers that is just kind of always jumps off the page is this: if you consolidate the assets under management of all of the participants, it'd be $4.5 trillion in assets under management. So it's quite a big group. Now, the average fund would represent 8.5 billion assets under management or 33 full-time employees. Looking at some of the recruitment and retention trends. So what is notable as we look at this, that compared to the 2022 NCPERS survey, we have seen a reduction in funds indicating that they have problems recruiting, right? So this light blue, no problem. So we're asking the ability to attract and retain skilled staff. So we're seeing that is becoming less of an issue than it was really at the heights coming out of the pandemic. And Nichole, you're on the call and you're responsible for this within CERS. What has been your experience over the past few years with ability to attract and retain?
So I would say that things have gotten better. Things are still, still a challenge. I'm never going to be an HR person who says, oh, attracting and retaining talent is never an issue. And we have just people lined up who are qualified and available and willing to take our positions, or also willing to stay no matter what. So we have seen some improvement there. But it's still a challenging area. In some areas, it's a little more challenging than others. We still have, issues in our IT areas and things like that. And so by having really good, solid compensation information and salary ranges and those kinds of things, it helps us make sure that we are offering positions at the rates that we need to, and then also that we are paying our current staff the appropriate market rate as well. And so we also see this, it's going to be interesting in the state of Illinois, starting at the beginning of 2025, we are going to need to post our salary ranges for our positions. And so it is going to be, I predict, even more important to make sure that we are on the mark with competitive salaries and making sure that we're where we need to be for compensation, because we won't even get people to apply if those salary amounts and those ranges are off. And so even though things are not quite as bad, but things were really bad there for a while, things are not as bad as they were, it's always going to be a challenge. And we always need to be working proactively to make sure that we are doing the right things to get the right people in the door and then keep them here.
Great, thank you. Another item captured in the current survey is just benefits prevalence. So how many pension funds offer these various different benefits? So this is interesting to benchmark as you're looking at your total rewards package and you want to take into account some of these other items just to see what other funds are offering. Some of the information that is notable in here is that 80% offer remote or flexible work. Nichole, I know that is something that probably did not exist prior to the pandemic, certainly to the extent now. So like, how did you navigate that process? What is the current kind of hybrid remote options that you have at CERS?
Absolutely. So we, like many employers, went from having the opinion and the thought that we couldn't possibly do this remotely to in March of 2020 saying we have to do it this way. And so we did actually have a time period during the pandemic when we were pretty much 100% remote for most of our positions. We did make the decision last year to go ahead and move into a 3-day in-office hybrid situation. We felt like it was really critically important to maintain some remote work, our staff had indicated that that was really highly valued by them, and we wanted to make sure that we were listening to them and taking that into consideration. However, we felt we needed to balance that with the business need of having people working on site together some of the time, having those natural interactions from a training perspective as we brought new employees on. We found that something that we measured was that it was more difficult when people were not here to just even overhear conversations from their colleagues for them to learn and understand and catch on to all the work that they needed to do. And so it has overall worked out well for us. We have a couple of outlying situations where maybe we have it slightly different, but for the most part, our folks are in office 3 days a week. And although there has been a slight adjustment from being 100% remote, overall, it's working out well for us. And we think it's necessary in order to remain competitive in our market, which may be different than markets in other states.
Yeah. And what about other benefits? Do you see, are you looking to move the needle with adding or reducing any employee benefits?
It's one of those things you hardly ever can reduce anything, right? Like once you've given it, it's very hard to take away. So you always want to be very intentional about that. But we did make a decision about 2 years ago that we would add paid parental leave as one of the benefits for our employees. We looked at our employee population and the things that we thought would help both attract and retain them. And we identified that as an area that did have significant importance for our staff, and also, quite honestly, was a message that we wanted to send as an employer, that work-life balance, including the need for parental leave, was important to us, and we wanted to be able to provide that support to our staff. And so it has been very well received. I think like any benefit that you add that includes time off, people were worried at first, like what is this impact going to be? But we have really, in my opinion, not seen any negative impact whatsoever, and it's been a really good move for us and has helped us with our attraction and retention of our staff.
Good. Couple real quick notes to build on that flexible and remote work trends. It is interesting that compared to the 2023 survey, both remote and flexible are up pretty significantly. So in the prior survey, remote work was reported at 55% prevalence, now at 80%, and then flexible went from 51 to 80% as well. And then another tidbit, the median number of in-office days is 3. I think that's probably not a surprise to any of the participants on the call. All right, let's look at the compensation survey, which was recently sent out to the participants. Just want to discuss a few things related to the methodology. So pulled some sample data here just to give a visual. You'll see that we give an overview where we are listing kind of all organizations. So that top line that you see within any page listing the results is always going to just be all of the different participants. And so what we see here is that out of the 158 organizations that participated, 90 had a match for this sample job that we pulled. And then out of that, there's 143 incumbents, right? So some of those funds have been more than one employee in that role. So we look at the different market percentiles for base salary and total cash compensation. We like to report the market percentiles. They're a little bit less influenced by outliers with something like the average. And it also helps you understand that distribution of pay. So what is that middle competitive half of the labor market? We are looking at organization weighted results. And so what we mean by that is that each participating organization counts as one, right? So in those situations where some of them have more than one employee in the job, we're going to average those compensation results and then count that as one participant. What that does, it helps us avoid some of the outliers where you might have a very large fund that has a high number of incumbents in one particular position. The results can kind of get skewed to them. And so we want to equalize for that and treat everyone as one. Some of the other data cuts, we're looking at assets under management, number of employees, and number of members, so that as you're trying to benchmark your organization, you have a few different relevant cuts that you can look at to evaluate how those size or scoping factors has an impact on compensation. And then one of the things that we were not able to provide before, but NCPERS has available, is the dashboard. And so we'll see a little bit more about that later, but that allows for some further exploration and slicing and dicing of the data. We always like to look at some of the year-over-year trends with compensation. That is a little fraught in this case because, from a CBIZ standpoint, we doubled the number of participants that we had previously, but we can't help ourselves. We got to look at some of that year-over-year data. And we start by just doing that by job function to see what are some of the big trends. So right here in the middle, you see the overall in the green. And so a little bit higher than 8% total cash compensation growth. So that's going to include any base plus bonus. And then we show the different functions there just to give you a sense of who's leading and who's lagging. Interestingly, at the bottom is administration. So that's going to be some of the top executive jobs. A year ago, we had that as one of the highest growth. So that might just be a little bit normalizing. Oddly, too, we see investments in the IT. Those are the typical hot job ones. And when we look at specific positions, we're going to see some IT and investment jobs there. But really, we're seeing a lot of the growth more on some of those like administrative jobs where you're going to compete more broadly against all employers, right? So it's purchasing, human resources, legal, communications. Those are not inherently, pension specific job functions. And so that might be driving some of the growth there. If we look at some of the top 10, bottom 10 growth areas on the increases, when we collect data for the investment positions, we're looking at kind of level and kind of discipline. As we get into those smaller results, we're just seeing a little bit more variability. So when we look at the asset class for the portfolio manager, we're seeing strategic research is having significantly high growth. That's probably just a result of having a small number of participants in the prior survey. And so we get a little bit more movement there. But you can see some legal, some investment jobs, some communication jobs make that up, as well as human resources. On the decreases, oddly, we see some of those same job functions, so it's hard to get any clear trends out of that. The securities, the investment attorney one, we'll talk about that more in a moment. That is one job where we did break that out in 2 levels in the current survey, so that one's a little misleading. And we're excited to report that if you're familiar with our survey in the past, we would sometimes report ISDs. That stands for insufficient data. So if we had fewer than 5 participants for any one position or combination of asset class, we would need to report insufficient data to comply with best practices and some legal guidance on how we can report this information. So we're happy to report that from an all organization standpoint, we do not have any ISDs in the current survey. So some of the positions that are listed there are those areas where we had ISDs in the past. So we've been collecting data for Chief Diversity Officer for a few years, and we've never been able to report data. We hit that 5 org count threshold this year, so you can see that information listed there. Those wages are fairly high compared to some of the others. It's likely a result of we're only going to see that position and maybe some of the really large funds that are going to staff that job. And for whatever reason in the past too, we struggled with purchasing, but we're able to provide information for that job function here with the Chief Purchasing Officer, Deputy, and Purchasing Assistant. You will still see some ISDs when you get into specific data cuts, so at certain member categories or assets under management. I mentioned the securities and investments attorney. That is a job that we added initially, maybe just a year or 2 ago. It has been one of those positions where we didn't have a lot of conversations around that, 5, 6 years ago. But we're seeing that more commonly as a dedicated function. And so we're building that out within the survey. So now we have 2 different job levels. And so as you are able to distinguish your match against those different levels, we see that the level 1 is going down a little bit. We're seeing that the level 2 is going up quite a bit as well. So that's a notable observation. And then looking at just some of the broader salary increase trends, We ask, what did you provide for your prior year salary increases, and what are you budgeting for your next review cycle? And as we look at, we break that out between the average and the median. Again, you're going to see a little bit more variability on the average. That's going to be skewed to some outliers. And we did see some big numbers in the salary increase budget of, over 15% in more than one case, right? So that's going to drive that average up a little bit. That on the last review, they're at 4.9%, and they're planning on this next review for 4.4%. If we look at the median, we're lining everyone up from low to high, and we're looking at that middle value. So we're going to see a little bit more concentration of what is more typical. And so we're seeing 4% both from the last review and the next review. Those numbers might not seem that high compared to what we've seen in the prior few years, but that's still pretty elevated from what we saw before the pandemic, where we would expect that to be closer to 3%. So those are some of the highlights from the survey process. And so again, if you're a participant, you would have received a copy of your results, and then we'll learn more about the dashboard in a moment. But I think it'd be helpful to hear from Nichole and just understand how this data ties into some of the things that CBIZ does from a compensation standpoint.
Absolutely. So we really do strive to stay at the right spot in the market, right? So you really don't want to get into a situation where you are needing to make 15% adjustments to salary. That means you've been off the mark for a while. And so as part of that effort, we do have a directive from our administration committee of our board that we basically engage in a third-party comp study at least once every 5 years. And so we take into consideration, what does inflation look like? What's the market doing in general? How much difficulty are we having attracting and retaining staff? And then making sure that we are going through that effort on a specific cadence to make sure that we are updating, and adjusting our ranges as necessary. So we do have a formal pay structure in place. All positions are slotted into a pay grade, and we pay based on those spots. And so we make sure that when we're bringing in somebody new, we're paying them the appropriate amount. And then we're also making sure, as we have promotions and things like that, that we are doing that appropriately as well. And then of course we have an annual process where we update our pay structure. So we do take into consideration those, recommendations like you were making about what do we move the actual pay structure to make sure that we don't get off kilter with that again. And then we also budget a merit component to that as well in years that we have the budget to do that. And so we want to make sure that we're not running into a situation where we are not keeping those pay structures up to date, that we are really appropriately making those movements so that as we bring new people in, we're keeping everybody on schedule and where they should be. And then also making sure that we're doing a good job of appropriately paying our current staff so that we don't run into issues with, attrition and those kinds of things. And so it really does become kind of a constant monitoring of things and making sure that we're making very intentional decisions about what our comp structure looks like, rather than, you kind of cross your fingers and hope. Like, we really want to make sure that we're doing right by our employees and making sure that the pay structure that we have reflects the work and the market that they live in. Okay. So with that, we do take into consideration several different things. And so, with the comp study, that gives us kind of very pension specific information that we, get from the CBIZ and NCPERS information. And then we also, as we do an individual compensation study, we look at our own market, we look at the market in Illinois, we look at the national market, and we really try to take all of that into consideration. So at CBIZ, we are located here in Champaign, Illinois, where many of you may know the University of Illinois is. And so we want to make sure that we are paying attention to the comp information that we're getting about the University of Illinois, which fortunately is pretty publicly available. So CBIZ can help us with that, because we want to make sure that from a geographic perspective, for the many positions that may be where they're moving, if they go somewhere else, we want to look at that. But then we also want to look at the state and national compensation, so that we make sure that we're competitive with those individuals who may be looking outside of just our community for other opportunities. And then also when we're looking to recruit people here to Champaign. And then, of course, looking at, general industry, and then also the public pension market, so that we're making sure that we're taking a lot of data points into consideration when we're looking at our comp. And then, like you said earlier, Joe, we look at, when we're talking about public pension, we look at assets under management, we look at the budget, the number of employees, those kinds of things, so that we are comparing, as they say, apples to apples, and making sure that we're doing the right thing as fiduciaries, and then also the right things for our employees.
And Nichole, I can set this one up
Absolutely.
a little bit. So one of the other things an organization needs to think about when they evaluate market data is, where within that market range are you looking to position your pay structure? And in broad terms, we describe that as matching the market, leading the market, or lagging the market. And so matching the market is paying in the middle of all those labor markets. It's building your structure around that market 50th percentile, so where half pay more, half pay less. And that's really the approach that most organizations take. So in some survey data, 85% or more of organizations are going to build their pay structure around that process. And so that's really the standard. Of course, you're going to have a range around that to have some flexibility for employees who just meet the minimum qualifications or who are highly experienced. But some organizations do choose intentionally to lead the market. And so pensions are an interesting space where you might compete against endowments and foundations for investment jobs, or, even the broader private market, where you might want to say, hey, within the public pension space, we need to be at the 75th or the 90th percentile to lead. And usually we're going to see that in areas where there's really hard to find specialized skills, where you want to lead the market, be an employer of choice, or in some cases you might do it because you don't have a strong, robust total rewards program, so you're going to make up for it with base pay. And then some organizations do choose to lag the market. So that is looking for anything below the market 50th. So you might do the market 40th or 25th percentile. And usually we're going to see that for organizations that have a strong variable pay component, or strong bonus, or strong benefits. And so they want their program to be rich through those items, not through base pay. Or some organizations are just simply limited by budget and they need to target that market position. So Nichole, anything you want to add on how you navigate where CERS should be positioned within that framework?
Absolutely. So we do look at, how is our recruiting going? Are we able to get people to accept offers, those kinds of things? And so we may have specific positions where, in general, maybe we're paying the 50th percentile, but we may have positions that we've identified we're having a hard time recruiting for, because within this market in Champaign, Illinois, there just aren't a lot of people with those kinds of skills and things like that. So we do take that into consideration as well. And so, wanting to make sure that our comp structure is really working for us, and making sure that we are able, again, to attract and retain the skilled employees that we need to do the work that we are doing. And so, we talk a lot in generalities, and there are always kind of, like you talked about, those outliers where you may make an exception. And that, again, is where you really need to have a good pulse on understanding what your comp looks like, and really paying attention to changes as they're happening, and not just taking kind of a wait and see approach, but rather a more active approach in that.
Great.
Okay, so I can speak a little bit to how we implement the compensation study results. And so, of course, as part of a comp study, part of the reason for doing that is to make sure that your pay structures are where they need to be. And so the first thing you want to do is update those structures. But, we looked at starting pay being an issue. And so by making a narrower pay structure, that resulted in some higher starting pay. And so that can be helpful if that's an area that you are looking for improvement in. We also have a Naperville office. And so obviously the market and pay in Naperville, Illinois is different, which is up by the Chicago area, than it is down here in central Illinois. And so we were, again, having a difficult time attracting and retaining staff up there. And so we identified that it made sense for us to make some adjustments there to reflect that higher cost of labor in that market. We also made sure that all employees were paid at least at the range minimum. So we did make adjustments to salaries as we identified that they were below those range minimums to make sure that they were being paid appropriately. And then, you want to watch for those compression adjustments to advance employees through the range as well. And so we did that as necessary. And then occasionally when you do a study like this, you find that you have some individuals that for lots of different reasons may be outside of the maximum range. And so in that situation, we had to determine what we needed to do there. And so sometimes we identified that maybe they were in the wrong position title, that the duties that they were doing were different from what we had established their position title actually should be. And so we made some movements there, did promotions, did those kinds of changes. And then sometimes you say, we've got somebody who's just outside that range. We're going to have to do some things over the next couple of years to get them back in line with where they really should be. And so paying attention just to make sure that you don't have a lot of outliers from where you really want things to be.
Good. All right, thank you for that, Nichole. So I think we want to turn it over to some additional information on how to access the survey. Hank, do you want to jump back in and talk about this part?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Nichole. Yeah, so as Joe mentioned, we shared the survey results to all those who participated, all the plans that participated in the 2024 compensation survey. Someone in your organization should have received an email that has the PDF version of the compensation survey. If you participated and are an NCPERS member, you also got additional information on how to access the online dashboard, which we'll be talking about momentarily. The one other thing I'll say before I demonstrate, if you did not participate in the 2024 compensation survey, first I would ask, please consider participating in 2025. We would love to, get to a higher number. Joe and I were talking as the survey was going out. We thought that 150 survey respondents would be a very solid start for our first year of partnership. Personally, I was hoping for like 200 participants. So let's try to hit that for 2025, everybody. And then the second thing is you can still purchase it even if you didn't participate. So if you are interested in purchasing the compensation survey, please send an email to research@ncpers.org and express that you are interested in the 2024 compensation survey, and someone will contact you and go through the process of getting that. Additionally, again, if you are an NCPERS member and you purchase the compensation survey, you will also be eligible to gain access to the dashboard. So let me stop talking about the dashboard and actually get to it. So Joe, if you would stop sharing your screen. And so folks, I'm going to try to demonstrate this live. Everybody, let's collectively cross our fingers and hope technology works. All right, I think it is. So hopefully you are at this point seeing my browser. And again, the instructions on how to get to this landing page, the 2024 Tableau dashboard, again, will be emailed to you or you already have it. And the basic premise here is that this online dashboard very much mimics what the static PDF report has, except that this is going to be dynamic. It's going to be allow you to add filters so that, again, as I said at the beginning, you can have apples to apples comparison. So when you first get to this landing page, as you see, you have a executive summary. What you will notice is a number of different ways to navigate the various positions. We basically made it fairly redundant. So you can use these tabs along at the very top, or you can use these sort of colored in sort of graphic navigation tools as well. So beyond sort of this first executive summary, if we wanted to talk about who responded, you notice that we navigated to the Who Responded tab. And here you will see various, so this is again in the aggregate. And then along the left-hand column, you will see number of ways to slice and dice this data set. So we can go into individual states if that is something you're interested in. We can do regions by Midwest, Northeast, South, and West. We can slice by the type of plan you are, whether you are a local plan or a county plan or a state plan, or by the type of employees that you cover. If you are a public safety plan and you just want to compare it to other public safety plans, you can do that. Or if you are an educational plan, you can compare yourself just to other educational plans, and you can do multiple levels. So if you are an educational plan and you happen to be a local plan, so for instance, say like New York City teachers retirement system, we can select a couple of different filters. So for instance, let's do this. Since Nichole is here, let's compare all the Midwest plans. So what you need to do is uncheck all and just click Midwest and hit apply. And you saw that how dynamically it changed the number of respondents. And again, from here, if you wanted to say, hey, Midwest plans that are, let's say, 1 to 15 billion, let's apply that. Again, very quickly, you see it's very responsive. You can see what Midwest plans with actuarial assets of 1 to 15 billions, what that universe looks like. And again, as always, you just can hit reset filters to go back to the original. One of the other areas that Joe and Nichole hit on are the compensation overview. So again, here we have the numeric average as well as the median salary and bonuses. The bars themselves denote the average or median salary ranges. And then the numbers inside corresponding to the dot shows what the average or median bonuses are. So if I scroll down a little bit more, you can see it most with sort of investment staff, where here, and then if you hover over a particular category, it will provide details. And so here for director of private equity, the median salary is over 287,000 with a median bonus of 25,000. So again, very useful way of filtering it. And again, we can go to each different job category. So instead of seeing all the job categories, let's do chief investment officers. Apply. This is the median salary and average for chief investment officers. And again, we can do a particular state. So here, this is where Joe mentioned that in some instances, we may have insufficient data, but I think we have enough data from, say, California. So if you wanted to see what this looks like in California, hold on one second. My navigation bar is, there we go. So this is what the number looks like for chief investment officers in the state of California only. We can, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so we would need to, yeah, it's in the West region. So yeah, so just really different, interesting ways of slicing and dicing the data. Again, this is something that Joe hit upon at the beginning, the type of benefits that are offered, and then all the various different roles. And here we also slice it by the number of years the incumbent has been in that position. So from under 5 all the way through 35 to 45 years. The last thing I will highlight, because we're running to the top of the hour and we do want to save some time for Q&A, is in addition to the navigation or the filters along the left-hand side, we do have additional filters at the top for certain categories. And here it's a slide bar so that you can really narrow down the position or the number of participants you have in your system, or sort of bonuses or the years served. So, again, hopefully you'll agree that this is a very powerful tool. We spent a lot of time and effort on this, so please, we encourage you to come here, spend some time. We do have also a tutorial on YouTube to help you navigate this if down the road you forget how to do some of the functions. But we think it's fairly intuitive, and hopefully it's something that you guys will value and will use. So with that, let me stop sharing. And we have a number of questions. So first is, how are you able to integrate the unitized employee compensation structure and the reality of the market compensation state?
So that might be unionized.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
is it unionized? Oh, okay.
And the reality of the market compensation state. Yeah, I might not fully understand the intent of that question, but I'll take a stab at it. I think, whenever there's union contracts, collective bargaining agreements in place, a lot of times the data that you see here can help inform that negotiation process. And so as you're going to the table, it's going to give you a sense of whether or not the wages are kind of in line significantly above or below. And so you can go into that armed with a good understanding of what the market realities are, and then help use that to drive some of the considerations.
Nichole, any thoughts?
No,
You
I
are in
agree.
Illinois. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I am in Illinois. And although my current employer is not unionized, I worked at the University of Illinois for 20 years, and they have 19 different collective bargaining agreements. And so certainly I would echo what Joe says about, really having good, solid information regarding what the market truly does look like is very helpful. It's good to be able to talk to the individuals who will ultimately, from your organization, be signing off on those contracts, so that you can explain why you're going to the negotiation table with what you're going with, and then also help the union to understand and its members to understand why the wages that you're offering are the wages that you're offering. And so I always say it's best to be most informed when you go into contract negotiations. And so this is just one more tool in your box to help you have that information, so that it doesn't become a I feel like or I think that, but rather I know that, and this is the information to back that up.
So relatedly, second question, and I'll start with you, Nichole. Our cabinet secretary believes that compensation should be consistent among all cabinet agencies. Any suggestions on how to convince the secretary that a retirement plan administration is different and should not be compared?
Yeah, it's a lot easier when everything looks like exactly the same in the world, right? Like that makes things so easy, but in fact it really doesn't, because organizations are different. And so again, it comes back to that concept of explaining what the market looks like, explaining how the positions that we have at a pension system do sometimes vary, and oftentimes vary from what other organizations within the state are doing. And so being able to share that information, and not only just the numbers behind, but the descriptions of the positions, the kinds of responsibilities that they have, those kinds of things. I'm not going to say it's an easy path. It's an uphill battle, I am sure. But again, information is your friend in these situations. And oftentimes it's not the first or the second conversation that makes that change, but rather many, many conversations in and consistent information informing that conversation. And so it won't be a situation where you likely are able to change that with the first time you come with the comp study information, but when you show those trends and that consistency over time, and then you map that back to information regarding retention and information regarding recruiting, that can help you, again, give you some more tools in your box to get that conversation going in the right direction.
Yeah, great answer. Joe, anything to add?
The only thing I would add is perhaps you could look at the compensation philosophy as a way to be consistent. And so that might say you're going to look at market data that's relevant to the industries where you compete for talent. And so as you apply that, that's going to look a little bit different within a pension fund, right? And so you do have this overarching consistency, but the application with specialized data where it applies, you could thread that needle, possibly taking that approach.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add is to the extent that peer-to-peer comparisons would be helpful. Again, gather the data from the dashboard. Maybe select the plans that are in your neighboring states. See what those numbers look like, and again, if your secretary is pegging salary to overall state compensation, my guess is that your compensation is lagging, and these surrounding state plans are effectively your competition as well. So hopefully that would be helpful. One of the questions we got before the survey even, or this webinar even started, is a question about executive director salary trends. Any comments from either of you about what executive director or CEO salary trends are?
Well, interestingly, we saw year over year from the survey results that it was pretty flat, but I think that's just more a product of changes in the number and group of the participants. One of the things that stands out when we look at the survey results is if you look at the relationship between assets under management and executive director or CEO pay, it is not that strong of a correlation. So like typically when we look at executive compensation, you would say that's highly correlated with pay. It's a little bit flat. And I think like one of the drivers behind that is some of the larger funds, especially like the boards within larger funds, they don't enjoy that experience that when they have a good executive director, that they just get picked off by a bigger fund, when those openings come up, and it's just like this domino effect, and they're constantly having to recruit to bring in a new executive director. And so I think we have seen a number of funds try to strengthen their position to say, hey, we need to be at least in the ballpark of what some of those larger funds are going to pay. And so as a result of that, pay is a little flat, there's definitely some differences and some trends still, but not to the degree that you might expect. It's not to the degree that we see within CIOs where there is a stronger correlation between size and pay.
Anything you want to add, Nichole?
I don't think so. I think Joe summed it up nicely there. I don't have any differences in opinion from that.
Great. Another question we just got is, how do you overcome the argument around a plan sponsor pushing back on increasing the salary of pension plan employees, especially when the plan is still tied to the plan sponsor, because doing so would directly impact their budget due to pressures from sponsor staff to match the increase? So somewhat similar. And then, it also goes to another question we got earlier, which is sort of navigating salary caps imposed by the plan sponsor relative to recruiting and retaining top talent.
Yeah,
So, oh, go ahead, Joe, sorry.
you're probably closer to that. So yeah, if you.
I mean, it's always kind of this difficult thing, right? It's kind of the one leads to the other. But at the end of the day, I mean, we do need to look at what does it take for the pension system to be competitive in the market, and how do we make sure that the pension system that whose employees are doing all of this really important work and need to be very qualified, very highly skilled, have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do the job well. How do we make sure that we are attracting and retaining those folks so that they can really do the best care for the pension, which is ultimately the best for the overall population? But I mean, I get it. Like, it's hard when we are a state university pension system, and so when we know that there are universities out there who may have a salary program that is, or who do have a salary program that is less than what our program was this year or whatever, that does take some explanation. But again, having the data and the information to back those decisions is really what allows you to move in that direction. If you don't have that data and that information, then first of all, you shouldn't be making those kinds of decisions just based on gut. And secondly, you need that in order to make sure that we are being the best fiduciaries of our pension program that we can be.
Joe, did you want to add anything? Or
Yeah, I can add a little to that process. I would say two wrongs don't make a right. What is the right benchmarking, best practice approach to do things, and try to lean on that. And I think another thing that can be effective is if you can work within the governance structure boards and maybe get some of those policies documented to say, here are the things that we're going to look at to make sure you're living up to that kind of fiduciary responsibility that Nichole was talking about on how you evaluate pay annually and update structures and plan for increases, so that you can have some of those objective rule-based things to fall back on when some of those things do go wrong.
right. I have two quick comments. First is there is a lawsuit, or there was a decision in California about a county plan separating itself relative to compensation decisions from the plan sponsor. So that might be something to take a look at. The other is, I think it's something that I mentioned at the beginning, which is, again, I completely agree with what Nichole and Joe said about finding the right benchmark, but as it relates to having these sort of difficult conversations with the plan sponsors, again, sort of trying to change and pivot the comparison to again a different type of sort of state employee. Again, a state university, football or college, or football or basketball coach at a state university, and I know it's a difficult pivot and transition, but it is something that we're trying to do at the national level. We are certainly past our time, so let's just do one other quick question, which is, how do you evaluate the competitiveness of compensation for roles that have few or no comparables among peers? Any thoughts?
So if they don't exist among peers, and so I assume by that you mean peer pension funds, that's where I think the NCPERS CBIZ survey does a great job documenting market competitive pay within that industry, but there's a lot of other survey data out there as well. And so depending on where you compete for talent, and if you need to look at some different labor markets, that might mean also looking at some salaries beyond this as well to help balance that out. The other thing I would add to that is, if you're focused on kind of a job architecture concept of looking at kind of level and scope, and does the job require a degree compared to other jobs, and you can find some of these correlations perhaps it's way more nuanced than that, but I think there's certainly some proven strategies. It just might not be within this data set.
Right. Well, Nichole, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you found this conversation to be insightful and beneficial for your plan. Our next webinar is December 5th, and we will be doing a review of legislative activities at the state and federal level, as well as a preview of what 2025 may bring for state and local pension plans. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day and week. Thank you, Nichole. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, everyone.